The conference room at the Pentagon buzzed with the usual pre-meeting chatter. Officers in crisp uniforms exchanged pleasantries and shuffled papers, preparing for what they assumed would be another routine briefing. The autumn sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table that dominated the center of the room. Nobody paid much attention when a woman in her early 30s entered quietly, carrying a worn leather portfolio under her arm. She wore her service uniform with the same precision as everyone else, but there was something different about her demeanor. Where others carried themselves with the practiced confidence of career military officers, she moved with a quiet economy of motion that spoke of something else entirely. Her eyes scanned the room, not with curiosity but with the trained assessment of someone who had learned to catalog exits, threats, and opportunities in a single glance. Major Sarah Mitchell had been summoned to this meeting with less than 24 hours' notice. The email had been brief, almost cryptic, requesting her presence at a joint task force briefing. No details about the agenda, no explanation of why her attendance was required. Just a time, a location, and a security clearance level that made her raise her eyebrows. She had served for 12 years, but meetings at this level of classification were rare, even for someone with her background. She found a seat near the back of the room, a habit she had developed during her years in the field. Never sit where you can be easily surrounded. Always keep your back to a wall. Always know where the doors are. These lessons had been beaten into her through experience, and they had kept her alive when others had not been so fortunate. As more officers filed in, Sarah recognized a few faces. There was Colonel Martinez from the Special Operations Command, a grizzled veteran with 3 decades of service. Lieutenant Commander Phillips from Naval Intelligence sat near the front, his pressed uniform making him look younger than his rank suggested. A handful of Air Force officers clustered together, speaking in low tones about recent deployments. But most of the faces were unfamiliar, which told Sarah this was going to be an unusual meeting. The room gradually filled to capacity. Sarah counted 37 people in total, representing every branch of the military and what appeared to be several civilian intelligence agencies. The security guards posted at the door checked credentials with unusual thoroughness, and she noticed the windows had been covered with blackout shades. Whatever they were about to discuss, someone wanted to ensure complete privacy. At precisely 1400 hours, the side door opened and General Robert Hawthorne entered the room. Every person stood at attention immediately, the casual conversations dying mid-sentence. Hawthorne was a legend in military circles, a 3-star general who had commanded operations in every major conflict zone for the past 2 decades. He moved with the authority of someone who had earned his rank through action rather than politics. And his reputation for demanding excellence was well known throughout the armed forces. "At ease," Hawthorne said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Take your seats." The assembled officers settled back into their chairs as the general made his way to the head of the table. He was followed by 2 aides who immediately began setting up a secure laptop and projector system. Sarah noticed they were using equipment she recognized from classified briefings, the kind that left no digital footprint and could not be remotely accessed. "Thank you all for attending on short notice," Hawthorne began, his steel-gray eyes sweeping across the room. "What we discuss in this room today is classified at the highest levels. Nothing you hear leaves these walls without explicit authorization. Is that understood?" A chorus of affirmative responses filled the room. Sarah remained silent, her expression neutral. She had heard similar warnings before, usually right before being told something that would fundamentally change her understanding of a situation. The general activated the projector and an image appeared on the screen behind him. It showed a desert landscape, barren and hostile, with mountains rising in the distance. Sarah recognized the terrain immediately, though she gave no outward sign of recognition. She had spent 18 months in that region, though officially she had never been there at all. "6 months ago," Hawthorne continued, "we received intelligence about a high-value target operating in this region. The target had been evading capture for 3 years, moving between safe houses and using a network of tunnels that made conventional operations nearly impossible. Every attempt to locate and neutralize this individual had failed, often with significant casualties to our forces." The image changed, showing what appeared to be a compound surrounded by high walls. The photograph had been taken from a considerable altitude, probably by a surveillance drone. Sarah could see the defensive positions, the guard rotations, the reinforced structures that would make a direct assault extremely costly. The intelligence suggested this target was planning a major operation that would result in significant loss of American lives, the general said. We had a narrow window to act, but conventional approaches were deemed too risky. The compound was too well defended, the terrain too challenging, and the political situation too delicate for a large-scale military operation. Sarah felt a familiar tension building in her shoulders. She knew where this was going, and she did not like it. Memories she had worked hard to compartmentalize began pushing at the edges of her consciousness, demanding attention she did not want to give them. A decision was made to deploy a specialized asset, Hawthorne said. A single operator with the necessary skills, language capabilities, and field experience to infiltrate the compound, gather additional intelligence, and if the opportunity presented itself, neutralize the target. The screen changed again, this time showing a nighttime image taken through night vision equipment. The green-tinted scene showed a figure moving across the compound, barely visible even with enhanced imaging. Sarah recognized her own movement pattern, the way she had learned to cross open ground by blending with shadows and timing her movements to the rhythms of the guard's attention. The operation was designated Specter 6, the general said. It was approved at the highest levels of government and military command. One operator, no backup, no extraction guarantee. The mission parameters were simple. Get in, confirm the target's identity and operational plans, and eliminate the threat if possible. Sarah could feel eyes beginning to turn toward her, though most in the room still had no idea who had executed the operation. The general's briefing was providing context, building towards something, but she could not yet see the endgame. Why bring her here? Why reveal details of an operation that was supposed to remain classified indefinitely? The operation was successful beyond all expectations, Hawthorne continued. The operator infiltrated the compound, spent 3 days gathering intelligence while maintaining her cover, identified not just the primary target but 2 additional high-value individuals, and successfully neutralized all 3 targets before extracting from the region. The screen now showed satellite images of the aftermath. Sarah remembered that night with crystalline clarity. The explosion that had provided her cover for the extraction, the 20-mile trek to the pickup point, the feeling of the helicopter's skids beneath her feet as she had finally climbed aboard. She had been operating for 72 hours straight at that point, surviving on adrenaline and training. The intelligence gathered during Operation Specter 6 prevented an attack that would have killed hundreds of American civilians, the general said. It also provided critical information that led to the disruption of 3 other planned operations and the capture of 17 additional enemy combatants. By any measure, it was one of the most successful solo operations in recent military history. The room remained silent, but Sarah could sense the shift in atmosphere. Officers were trying to identify who among them had been the operative. Some were looking at the special operations personnel, assuming it must be one of the obvious candidates. Others were scanning the room with renewed interest, trying to spot anyone who looked like they might have the skills for such a mission. However, Hawthorne said, and his tone shifted slightly, becoming harder. There is now a situation that requires us to acknowledge this operation's existence and the individual who executed it. Intelligence has indicated that enemy forces have identified the operative responsible for Specter 6. Her identity has been compromised, and there is credible evidence of active threats against her life. The tension in the room ratcheted up immediately. A compromised operative was a serious matter, particularly one who had been involved in such a sensitive operation. Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly, but her face remained impassive. She had known this day might come. Anonymity was the best protection an operative could have, but it was never guaranteed. The purpose of this briefing, the general continued, is twofold. First, to inform relevant personnel about the existence and success of Operation Specter 6, as this information may become public in the near future due to the security compromise. Second, to introduce you to the operative responsible for the mission, as she will be transitioning to a new role that will require collaboration with many of you. Now, all eyes were actively searching the room, trying to identify who the general was talking about. Sarah saw speculation in their faces. They were looking at the male special operations officers, the ones with the obvious credentials and the combat records that screamed elite warrior. It did not occur to most of them to look at the quiet woman sitting near the back of the room, the one with a distinguished service medal that most of them probably assumed was for administrative excellence. General Hawthorne's eyes found Sarah across the room, and he gestured toward her. Major Mitchell, would you please stand and state your operational call sign for the record? The room fell into a stunned silence as every head turned to look at her. Sarah rose smoothly from her chair, her military bearing perfect, her expression calm despite the 40-plus pairs of eyes now fixed on her. She could see the shock on many faces, the disbelief, the rapid recalculation of assumptions. Major Sarah Mitchell, she said, her voice clear and steady. Operational call sign, Specter 6. The room erupted into chaos. Officers began talking over each other, voices rising in surprise and confusion. Colonel Martinez was staring at her with his mouth slightly open, clearly trying to reconcile the woman he had seen enter the room with the legendary operative who had pulled off one of the most daring solo missions in recent history. Lieutenant Commander Phillips looked like he had been hit with a bucket of cold water, his carefully composed expression shattered by genuine shock. "That's impossible," someone muttered loudly enough to be heard. Specter 6 took out 3 armed combatants in close quarters and extracted through hostile territory alone. "There's no way. Gentlemen, ladies, quiet." Hawthorne's voice cut through the noise like a blade, instantly restoring order. Major Mitchell executed Operation Specter 6 with a level of skill and professionalism that few could match, regardless of gender. The fact that many of you are surprised says more about your assumptions than it does about her capabilities. Sarah remained standing, enduring the scrutiny with the same calm she had maintained while operating behind enemy lines. This was just another kind of battlefield, one where weapons were perceptions and judgments rather than bullets and explosives. She had learned long ago that underestimation could be as useful as any tactical advantage. Major Mitchell, the general continued, has been selected to head a new joint task force focused on developing and deploying specialized reconnaissance operations. Her experience makes her uniquely qualified for this position, and I expect every person in this room to afford her the respect and cooperation her rank and record deserve. The general paused, letting his words sink in. "Are there any questions?" A hand went up near the front. An Army captain Sarah did not recognize. "Sir, with respect, Operation Specter 6 required extensive physical capabilities. Infiltration, sustained operations without support, close quarters combat." "How exactly did Major Mitchell— Are you questioning the after-action reports, Captain?" Hawthorne's voice could have frozen water. "Because those reports were verified by multiple sources, including drone surveillance, signals intelligence, and physical evidence recovered from the site. Or are you suggesting that Major Mitchell somehow faked her way through an operation that 3 different special operations teams had deemed impossible?" The captain wisely chose to remain silent. Sarah spoke for the first time since identifying herself. "If I may, General?" Hawthorne nodded, giving her the floor. "I understand the skepticism," Sarah said, addressing the room. "Most of you have been trained to look for specific physical profiles when you think about special operations. Size, strength, the kind of attributes that make someone stand out in combat. But successful infiltration isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about being invisible when you need to be invisible, and lethal when you need to be lethal." She moved away from her seat, walking slowly around the perimeter of the room. Officers tracked her movement, and she could see them reassessing their initial judgments. "In the region where I operated, a woman can move through certain spaces that would be impossible for a male operative," she continued. "Markets, residential areas, even secure compounds often have women working as domestic staff. The targets we were hunting had extensive security, but that security was designed to spot male threats. They weren't looking for someone like me." Sarah stopped near the projection screen, standing beside the image of the compound she had infiltrated. "I spent 3 days inside those walls, working as a servant. I spoke the local dialect fluently. I knew the cultural customs, the religious practices, the social hierarchies. I was invisible because I became exactly what they expected to see, right up until the moment I needed to be something else. The room was absolutely silent now, every person hanging on her words. The silence in the conference room stretched for several long seconds after Sarah finished speaking. She could see the mental calculations happening behind the eyes of the assembled officers, the revision of assumptions, the reluctant acceptance that everything they thought they knew about operational capabilities might need reconsideration. General Hawthorne allowed the moment to breathe before speaking again. Major Mitchell will be available for individual consultations after this briefing, he said. But first, there are additional details about the security situation that everyone needs to understand. Major, please be seated. Sarah returned to her chair as the general advanced to the next slide. The image showed what appeared to be intercepted communications, lines of text in Arabic with English translations beneath. She recognized some of the content immediately and felt her jaw tighten involuntarily. 3 weeks ago, our signals intelligence intercepted these communications, Hawthorne explained. They originated from a cell operating in the same region where Operation Specter 6 took place. The messages specifically reference the woman who killed the brothers and include physical descriptions that match Major Mitchell. More concerning, they include detailed information about her assignment here in the United States, including her duty station and residential address. The implications hit the room like a physical force. A compromised operative was serious enough, but one being actively hunted on American soil was a different magnitude of threat entirely. Sarah had known about the intercepted communications for 2 weeks now, had been involved in the analysis and threat assessment. What she had not known was that Hawthorne intended to brief such a large group about the situation. How did they identify her? Colonel Martinez asked, his earlier shock replaced by professional concern. If she was operating undercover, using local clothing and language, how did they connect her to the operation? We're still investigating that, Hawthorne replied. Our assessment is that someone within the compound survived long enough after the extraction to provide information. We know that one of the targets had personal security cameras that were not connected to the main surveillance system. It's possible footage from those cameras made it into the wrong hands. The screen changed again, showing a grainy video capture. Sarah watched herself on screen, moving through a darkened corridor inside the compound. The image quality was poor, but it was clearly recognizable as her. She remembered that hallway, the careful counting of steps in the darkness, the awareness that discovery at that moment would mean immediate death. This footage surfaced on encrypted channels approximately 4 months ago, the general continued. At the time, we assessed it as low risk because facial recognition was difficult and there was nothing linking the operative to any specific identity. However, subsequent intelligence suggests that additional information was leaked, possibly by someone with access to classified personnel files. That revelation sent a new wave of concern through the room. An external breach was one thing, but if someone with internal access had compromised operational security, the implications were far more serious. Trust was the foundation of military operations, and the possibility of an insider threat undermined that foundation in ways that were difficult to quantify. Sarah had spent considerable time with the counterintelligence team investigating the breach. They had narrowed down the potential sources to a small pool of individuals with the necessary access, but proving who was responsible had proven frustratingly difficult. The leak had been careful, professional, suggesting someone who understood how to cover their tracks. Major Mitchell is now in an unusual position, Hawthorne said, his tone becoming more direct. Her operational effectiveness depended on anonymity, and that anonymity has been compromised. At the same time, her experience and expertise are too valuable to waste on a desk job. After extensive consultation with senior leadership, we've decided that the best path forward is to bring her into a more public-facing role. He gestured toward Sarah. Hence the formation of the new Joint Task Force. Major Mitchell will be heading a team focused on developing innovative approaches to reconnaissance and infiltration operations. This will involve working with personnel from all branches, consulting on operational planning, and potentially training select operatives in specialized techniques. Sarah understood the strategy even if she did not particularly like it. By making her visible, By placing her in a position where her presence was explainable and documented, they were making it harder for enemy forces to act against her without creating an international incident. A random attack on an anonymous operative might go unnoticed, but an attack on a high-profile task force commander would generate attention and consequences. It was sound tactical thinking, but it meant giving up the shadows that had been her home for most of her career. She would no longer be the invisible operator who could move through hostile territory unnoticed. Instead, she would be a known quantity, someone whose face would be in briefing materials and whose movements would be tracked and analyzed by both friendly and enemy intelligence services. "I know this isn't what you signed up for, Major," Hawthorne said, addressing her directly. "But circumstances have changed, and we need to adapt. Your expertise is too valuable to lose, and your safety requires a different operational approach. Are you prepared to take on this assignment?" Sarah stood again, meeting the general's eyes across the room. "Yes, sir. I'll serve where I'm needed." "Good." Hawthorne nodded, then turned back to the assembled officers. "Now, I want to address something directly. Major Mitchell's presence in this new role is going to challenge some of you. Some of you are going to question whether she deserves this position, whether her success was luck or skill, whether a woman can effectively lead this kind of operation. Let me be absolutely clear about this." His voice took on an edge that made several officers sit up straighter. Major Mitchell didn't get this assignment because of diversity initiatives or political correctness. She got it because she accomplished something that multiple special operations teams couldn't accomplish. And she did it alone, with minimal support, in an environment where a single mistake would have meant capture and execution. That is not luck. That is exceptional skill combined with years of training and experience. The general paused, letting his words settle. "If any of you have concerns about working with Major Mitchell based on her gender, rather than her abilities, I suggest you examine those concerns very carefully. Because the military I serve in values results over prejudice, and Major Mitchell has delivered results when it mattered most." The rebuke was delivered with professional precision, but there was no mistaking the anger beneath the general's calm exterior. Sarah appreciated the support, even as she recognized the complicated position it put her in. Hawthorne's words were necessary, but they also painted a target on her back for anyone who resented being called out or who disagreed with his assessment. "Major Mitchell," the general said, "would you be willing to share some details about the operational planning for Specter 6? I think it would be educational for everyone here to understand the kind of preparation that goes into a mission of this complexity." It was not really a request, and Sarah understood what Hawthorne was doing. By having her walk through the operation in detail, he was demonstrating her expertise and making it harder for skeptics to dismiss her capabilities. It was also an opportunity for her to establish credibility with the officers she would need to work with in her new role. "Of course, sir," she said, moving to the front of the room. The general stepped aside, giving her control of the presentation. Sarah advanced to a slide showing a map of the region where the operation had taken place. "The initial planning phase took 3 months," she began. "Intelligence indicated that the target was operating from this compound, but we had limited information about the internal layout, security protocols, and daily routines. The first challenge was gathering enough information to make infiltration feasible." She clicked to the next slide, showing surveillance photos taken from various angles. "I spent 4 weeks in the region before the actual infiltration, operating undercover as a humanitarian worker. This gave me access to local markets, medical facilities, and community centers where I could observe patterns and gather information. I learned the local dialect, not just the language, but the specific accent and vocabulary used in that area. I studied the social customs, the religious practices, the way women dressed and moved and interacted with others." An Air Force major raised his hand. "How did you avoid detection during that preliminary phase? Surely the target's security forces were monitoring the area for unusual activity." "They were," Sarah confirmed, "which is exactly why I made sure there was nothing unusual about my presence. I worked at a medical clinic that had been operating in the area for 5 years. I treated patients, many of whom were connected to the target's organization. I built relationships, established a reputation as someone who could be trusted. I became part of the landscape, invisible because I was exactly what I appeared to be." She advanced to another slide. this one showing detailed floor plans of the compound. Once I had established my cover and gathered preliminary intelligence, I needed access to the compound itself. The target's first wife had chronic health issues that required regular medical treatment. I arranged through local intermediaries to be recommended as someone who could provide that treatment. Colonel Martinez leaned forward, his experienced eyes studying the floor plans. That's an incredible risk. One background check, one suspicious question, and your cover collapses. Yes, Sarah agreed, which is why my legend had to be bulletproof. I didn't just pretend to be a medical worker. I actually was a medical worker with years of documented service in the region. Every aspect of my cover story was verifiable because it was real. The only deception was my motivation for being there. She could see understanding dawning on several faces. This wasn't the kind of operation where you parachuted in under cover of darkness and shot your way through opposition. This was something far more subtle, requiring patience and planning that extended over months rather than hours. I spent 3 days in that compound, Sarah continued, treating the target's wife and gradually expanding my access to other areas. I observed security rotations, noted the locations of cameras and sensors, identified the key personnel and their routines. I also installed micro-surveillance devices in strategic locations, which allowed our intelligence teams to monitor communications and activities. The next slide showed technical diagrams of the devices she had deployed. They were remarkably small, barely larger than a button, designed to be hidden in plain sight. Sarah had placed them in picture frames, light fixtures, and decorative objects throughout the compound. On the third day, intelligence analysis of the surveillance feeds confirmed the presence of all 3 high-value targets and indicated they were planning an imminent operation. I received authorization to proceed with elimination. She paused, aware that this was the part of the story that would be hardest for some in the room to accept. Clean, surgical operations looked simple in after-action reports, but the reality was always messy and complicated. The actual elimination took place during evening prayers, she said quietly. The targets and most of their security personnel were in the compound's mosque. I had prepared the operation carefully, using materials I had gradually brought into the compound over the 3 days. The explosion was designed to look like an accident, a gas leak in the mosque's heating system. She did not mention the moment of hesitation before she had triggered the device, the knowledge that she was about to kill not just the 3 targets, but potentially others who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. These were the moral calculations that kept her awake at night, the weight of decisions made in seconds that could never be unmade. The explosion provided cover for my extraction, Sarah continued. In the chaos and confusion, I was able to move to a pre-positioned exit point and make my way out of the compound. The 20-mile trek to the extraction point took 8 hours, moving at night through hostile territory with search parties active in the area. Lieutenant Commander Phillips spoke up, his skepticism evident despite the general's earlier rebuke. Major, I mean no disrespect, but 20 miles through hostile territory at night, alone, after executing a high-risk operation. That seems almost impossible, even for the most trained operatives. Sarah met his eyes steadily. I'm not the most trained operative, Commander. I'm just trained differently. Everything I did during Specter 6 was the result of years of preparation and practice. The physical conditioning, the navigation skills, the ability to move silently through difficult terrain. These aren't superhuman abilities. They're learned skills that anyone with sufficient dedication can develop. She clicked to the final slide, showing her helicopter extraction. The image had been captured by the aircraft's onboard cameras and showed her climbing aboard, exhausted and filthy, but alive. The meeting eventually broke up after another hour of discussion, but Sarah could feel the weight of attention following her as officers filed out of the conference room. Some approached her directly, offering congratulations or asking questions about the operation. Others kept their distance, their expressions suggesting they were still processing everything they had learned. Colonel Martinez was among the first to shake her hand, his grip firm and respectful. That was one hell of a briefing, Major, he said. I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never heard anything quite like Specter 6. You have my respect and my support for whatever comes next. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied, genuinely appreciating the gesture. Martinez had a reputation as a straight shooter who valued competence above all else. His endorsement would carry weight with the other special operations personnel. Lieutenant Commander Phillips approached more hesitantly, looking somewhat chagrined. Major Mitchell, I apologize for my earlier skepticism. It was unprofessional. Sarah gave him a slight smile. Skepticism is healthy, Commander. It keeps us sharp. Just make sure it's based on evidence rather than assumptions. As the room gradually emptied, General Hawthorne gestured for Sarah to remain. Once they were alone except for his two aides who were efficiently packing up the presentation equipment, he allowed himself a small smile. Well, that went about as well as could be expected, he said, though I suspect you're going to face some headwinds in the coming weeks. I've faced worse, sir, Sarah replied. Yes, you have. Hawthorne's expression became more serious. But I want you to understand something, Major. This assignment isn't just about utilizing your expertise, it's also about protecting you. The threats against you are credible and specific. By placing you in a high-profile position, we're creating a situation where an attack against you would have significant repercussions. It's not perfect protection, but it's better than leaving you exposed as an anonymous operative with a target on her back. Sarah nodded, understanding the calculation even if she did not entirely like it. I appreciate the consideration, sir. Though I have to ask, does this mean I'm permanently out of field operations? Hawthorne considered the question carefully. Not permanently, no, but for the foreseeable future, yes. The intelligence community has made it clear that your face is known to hostile forces. Operating in the field would put not just you, but any team you're working with at increased risk. Your value now is in training others, developing new operational concepts, and bringing your experience to bear on strategic planning. It was what Sarah had expected, but hearing it stated so directly still felt like a door closing. She had spent most of her adult life preparing for and executing field operations. The adrenaline, the challenge, the knowledge that her actions made a tangible difference in keeping people safe. These had been the driving forces of her career. Transitioning to a desk job, even a prestigious one, felt like losing a part of her identity. I understand, sir, she said, keeping her voice neutral. Hawthorne studied her for a moment, his experienced eyes reading the conflict she was trying to hide. I know this isn't what you wanted, Major, but leadership isn't always about doing what we want. Sometimes it's about accepting what we can contribute and making the most of it. You have knowledge and skills that could save dozens, maybe hundreds of lives if you can effectively pass them on to the next generation of operatives. That's not a consolation prize. It's a different kind of mission, but no less important. He was right, Sarah knew. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were two different things. She had spent years being the person who went into dangerous places and did impossible things. Now she would be the person who trained others to do those things instead. It was an adjustment that would take time. There's one more thing, Hawthorne said, pulling a folder from his briefcase. Your new assignment comes with a promotion. Effective immediately, you're being advanced to Lieutenant Colonel. The paperwork has already been processed. Congratulations, Colonel Mitchell. Sarah took the folder, momentarily speechless. Lieutenant Colonel was a significant jump, particularly for someone her age. She knew the promotion was partly political, a way of signaling that her new position carried real authority, but it was still a validation of her service and sacrifice. Thank you, sir, she managed. You've earned it, Hawthorne said simply. Now I suggest you take the rest of the day to settle in. Your office has been prepared in Building 7, 3rd floor. Your administrative assistant will get you oriented tomorrow morning. You'll have 2 weeks to set up your team and establish operational protocols before your first official briefing. Sarah left the Pentagon as the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The familiar weight of her uniform felt different somehow, heavier with new responsibilities but also with the recognition of what she had accomplished. She made her way to the parking garage, her mind already beginning to plan the structure of her new team and the training programs they would need to develop. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car. A text from an unknown number. Congratulations on the promotion, Specter 6. We know where you are. Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward the concealed weapon at her hip as her eyes scanned the parking garage. Years of training kicked in automatically. cataloging exits and potential threats. The message could be a bluff, psychological warfare intended to keep her off balance. But it could also be legitimate, a demonstration that despite all the security measures and strategic positioning, her enemies had not forgotten about her. She forwarded the message to the security team responsible for monitoring threats and then carefully examined her car for any signs of tampering. Everything appeared normal, but she ran through a complete check anyway, using a small mirror to look under the chassis and examining the door seals for any evidence of forced entry. Only when she was satisfied that the vehicle was secure did she get in and start the engine. The drive to her apartment took 40 minutes through rush-hour traffic. Sarah used the time to call her parents, something she had been putting off since learning about the security compromise. They deserved to know that there might be threats, even though explaining the situation without revealing classified details would be challenging. Her mother answered on the third ring. "Sarah, it's so good to hear from you. How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm fine, Mom," Sarah said, keeping her tone light. "Just calling to check in. How are you and Dad?" They talked for a few minutes about ordinary things. Her father's retirement project of building a deck, her mother's garden, the neighbor's new dog. It was comforting in its normalcy, a reminder that there was a world beyond missions and threats and classified briefings. But eventually, Sarah had to address the real reason for her call. "Mom, I need to tell you something," she said carefully. "My job situation has changed. I've been promoted and given a new assignment that's going to be more public-facing than my previous work. It's a good thing, career-wise, but it also means there might be increased attention on me and, by extension, on you and Dad." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Her mother was no fool. She had been a military wife for 30 years before her husband retired, and she understood how to read between the lines. "What kind of attention are we talking about, Sarah?" "Probably nothing," Sarah said, which was not quite a lie, but definitely not the whole truth. "But I wanted you to be aware. If you notice anyone unusual around the house, anyone asking questions about me, I want you to call this number immediately." She provided the contact information for the security team, explaining it as a standard precaution for personnel in sensitive positions. Her mother listened quietly, then said, "Your father and I are proud of you, honey. Whatever you're doing, whatever you've done, we know it matters. Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise, Mom." After ending the call, Sarah felt the familiar weight of guilt that came with maintaining necessary secrets from the people she loved. Her parents knew she worked in military intelligence and had gathered that her assignments were sometimes dangerous, but they had no idea about operations like Specter 6. They could never know the full truth about what she had done, the lives she had taken, the risks she had accepted as part of her duty. She arrived at her apartment building as darkness was settling over the city. The building had good security, with controlled access and surveillance cameras, but Sarah had learned long ago that no place was truly secure if someone was determined enough. She parked in her assigned spot, checked her surroundings one more time, and made her way to the elevator. Her apartment was on the 6th floor, a modest one-bedroom unit that served primarily as a place to sleep between assignments. Sarah had never been much for decorating or accumulating possessions. The walls were bare, except for a single photograph of her parents and a certificate from her officer training. The furniture was functional but sparse. Someone looking at the apartment would have difficulty determining anything meaningful about the person who lived there, which was exactly how Sarah preferred it. She checked the telltales she had placed on the door and windows before leaving that morning, tiny pieces of tape positioned in ways that would reveal if someone had entered during her absence. Everything appeared undisturbed. Inside, she went through a methodical check of each room, looking for anything out of place, any sign that her space had been compromised. Only when she was satisfied that everything was secure did she allow herself to relax slightly. Sarah changed out of her uniform and into comfortable civilian clothes, then made herself a simple dinner. As she ate, she reviewed the files Hawthorne had given her about the new task force. She would have access to personnel from all branches of the military, as well as liaisons from various intelligence agencies. Her job would be to develop training programs and operational concepts that could be implemented across different units and command structures. It was important work, she reminded herself. The techniques she had used during Specter 6 were unconventional, But they had been effective precisely because they were unconventional. If she could teach other operatives to think differently about infiltration and intelligence gathering, to look beyond traditional special operations approaches, it could revolutionize how certain missions were conducted. But as she sat in her quiet apartment, Sarah could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. For years, she had been defined by her ability to operate in the shadows, to be someone who could disappear into a role and emerge only when the mission was complete. Now, she would be visible, known, her face and name attached to briefings and training programs. It was necessary, she understood that. But it felt like losing a piece of herself. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed a number she recognized, James Chen, one of her former handlers from the intelligence community. She answered immediately. "Sarah, it's James. I heard about today's briefing. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," she said. It was about what I expected, though having Hawthorne lay everything out for a room full of people was a bit surreal. "I can imagine," James said. "Listen, I want you to know that the investigation into the security breach is continuing. We've made some progress, narrowed down the pool of potential sources. I can't give you details, but I didn't want you to think this was being forgotten or pushed aside." "I appreciate that, James. Any sense of how serious the threats are?" There was a pause, and Sarah could almost hear James choosing his words carefully. "Serious enough that you should take the precautions seriously. The message you received today, we traced the number to a burner phone that was used once and then discarded. Professional tradecraft. Whoever sent it knows what they're doing. So it's not just internet trolls trying to scare me. No," James confirmed. "This is organized, well-funded, and persistent. The good news is that your new position makes you a harder target. The bad news is that these people have demonstrated patience and capability. Don't let your guard down, Sarah. Not for a second." After the call ended, Sarah sat in the darkness of her apartment and allowed herself a moment of honest reflection. She was scared, though she would never admit it to anyone else. Not the sharp, immediate fear of being under fire in a combat zone, but the deeper, more insidious fear that came from knowing there were people actively working to kill her, and she could not see them, or predict when they might act. She thought about the targets she had eliminated during Specter 6, the 3 men who had died in the explosion she had triggered. At the time, it had been a clear-cut decision. They were planning attacks that would kill innocent people, and she had the opportunity to stop them. The moral calculus had seemed straightforward, but now those men had brothers, friends, comrades who wanted revenge. The cycle of violence she had participated in continued, and she had become a target herself. It was the nature of the work, she knew. Every operative who worked in lethal operations understood that actions had consequences, that enemies made in the field did not simply disappear when the mission ended. Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there were people who wanted her dead. People who saw her as a murderer rather than a soldier following orders. Were they right? The question had haunted her since the first time she had taken a life in the line of duty, years before Specter 6. There were no easy answers, only the certainty that she had done what she believed was necessary to protect innocent lives. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Sarah threw herself into building her new team, reviewing personnel files and conducting interviews with potential candidates. She was looking for people with diverse skill sets and unconventional backgrounds, operatives who could think creatively about problems rather than simply following established protocols. Her administrative assistant turned out to be a former Marine named Rachel Torres, a sharp woman in her early 30s who had transitioned from field operations to a support role after being injured during a deployment. Rachel quickly proved invaluable, managing Sarah's schedule and helping her navigate the bureaucratic complexities of setting up a new command structure. "You've got back-to-back meetings all week," Rachel informed her on the Monday morning of her second week. "Intelligence briefing at 0800, personnel interviews from 10 to 1400, budget review at 1500, and a dinner meeting with Colonel Martinez at 1900. Sarah nodded, already feeling the weight of her new responsibilities. "What's the dinner meeting about?" He didn't specify, but I got the impression it was informal. He suggested a restaurant off base, which makes me think he wants to talk about something that's not strictly official. That evening, Sarah met Martinez at a quiet Italian restaurant about 20 minutes from the Pentagon. The colonel was already seated when she arrived, and he stood to greet her with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming, Colonel Mitchell," he said, using her new rank naturally. "I hope you don't mind the informal setting. I find these conversations go better away from the office." They ordered food and made small talk while waiting for their meals to arrive. Martinez asked about her progress setting up the task force, offered some advice about dealing with inter-service rivalries, and shared a few war stories from his own career. But Sarah could sense he was building towards something, and she waited patiently for him to get to the real purpose of the meeting. Finally, over coffee, Martinez leaned back in his chair and studied her with frank assessment. "I'm going to be direct with you, Sarah. May I call you Sarah in this setting?" "Of course, sir." "And drop the sir when we're not on duty. I'm Rob." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've been watching how people are reacting to your appointment, and I want to give you some advice. Not as a superior officer, but as someone who's been navigating this system for a long time." Sarah set down her coffee cup, giving him her full attention. "You're facing 3 separate challenges," Martinez said. "First, you're a woman in a field that's still predominantly male, and some people are going to resist that regardless of your qualifications. Second, you achieved something extraordinary with Specter 6, and there are always people who will look for ways to diminish extraordinary achievements because they're uncomfortable with them. Third, you're young for your rank and position, which will make some people assume you got here through favoritism rather than merit." "I'm aware of all 3 challenges," Sarah said quietly. "I'm sure you are. But here's what I want you to understand. You're going to have people testing you, pushing boundaries, seeing if they can get you to respond emotionally or defensively. Don't take the bait. Stay professional, stay focused on the work, and let your results speak for themselves. The people whose opinions actually matter will judge you on your performance, not on their prejudices." Sarah appreciated the advice, recognizing it came from genuine concern. "Thank you, Rob. I'll keep that in mind." "There's something else," Martinez continued. "Hawthorne putting you in this position was a bold move, and it's created some friction at higher levels. There are generals who think he's making a political statement rather than a tactical decision. They're watching you closely, waiting to see if you succeed or fail. Your success or failure is going to have implications beyond just your own career." "No pressure then," Sarah said with a slight smile. Martinez grinned. "Welcome to senior leadership. The stakes are always higher than you think they should be." His expression became more serious. "But I want you to know that you have allies, Sarah. A lot of us who've been doing this work for years recognize that the way we've always done things isn't necessarily the best way. We need people who can think differently, who can bring new perspectives and approaches. That's what you represent, and that's valuable regardless of what some hidebound traditionalists might think." The conversation stayed with Sarah as she drove home that night. Martinez's words had been both encouraging and sobering, a reminder that her work would be scrutinized in ways that went beyond simple job performance. She represented change, and change always met resistance. 3 days later, Sarah held her first official meeting with her assembled team. She had selected 12 people representing different branches and specialties, each bringing unique skills and perspectives. They gathered in a secure conference room, and Sarah could see the mixture of curiosity and skepticism on their faces as they waited to hear what she had to say. "Good morning," she began, standing at the head of the table. "I know most of you are wondering what exactly we're going to be doing in this task force. Some of you volunteered for this assignment, others were selected and may be less enthusiastic about being here. Either way, we're going to be working together to fundamentally rethink how we approach certain types of operations." She activated the presentation screen, showing a series of operational failures from the past decade. Hostage rescues that had gone wrong, intelligence-gathering missions that had been compromised, infiltration attempts that had been detected before achieving their objectives. "What all of these failures have in common," Sarah said, "is that they relied on traditional special operations approaches in situations where those approaches were predictable and therefore counterable. The enemy knew what to expect, and they were prepared for it." She advanced to the next slide, showing a different set of operations including Specter 6. These successes, on the other hand, used unconventional approaches that the enemy didn't anticipate. They succeeded because they looked different, thought different, and operated different from what the enemy was prepared to defend against. A Navy SEAL named Derek Paulson raised his hand. With respect, Colonel, unconventional approaches are higher risk. There's a reason we have standard operating procedures and established tactics. They work, and they protect our people. You're absolutely right, Lieutenant, Sarah agreed. Standard procedures exist for good reasons, and I'm not suggesting we abandon them. What I am suggesting is that we need to expand our toolkit to include approaches that can be used when standard procedures are likely to fail. Sometimes the safer option is the one the enemy isn't expecting. She spent the next hour walking them through case studies, including detailed breakdowns of several operations where unconventional approaches had succeeded, where conventional tactics would have failed. She could see some team members beginning to engage with the concepts, asking thoughtful questions and pushing back in productive ways. By the end of the meeting, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic. Building the team would take time, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead, but she had the foundation to work with. These were skilled professionals who, despite their initial skepticism, were willing to listen and learn. Over the following weeks, Sarah settled into her new role. She developed training curricula, consulted on operational planning for missions she would never participate in directly, and gradually built relationships with the key players in the special operations and intelligence communities. The work was challenging and often frustrating, but it was also meaningful in ways she had not initially anticipated. The security situation remained tense but stable. Sarah received periodic updates from the counterintelligence team about potential threats, and she maintained careful security protocols in her daily life. The investigation into the breach that had compromised her identity continued, though progress was slow. Whoever had leaked the information had covered their tracks well. One evening, nearly 2 months after the Pentagon briefing, Sarah was working late in her office when her phone rang. It was James Chen again, and the urgency in his voice immediately put her on alert. Sarah, we've had a development. The investigation identified the source of the leak. It was Captain David Reeves, a signals intelligence analyst with access to classified personnel files. We arrested him 3 hours ago. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and anger. Has he talked? Do we know why he did it? He's cooperating, providing details in exchange for a reduced sentence, James said. According to his statement, he was recruited by a foreign intelligence service 2 years ago. They've been slowly extracting information from him, building profiles on various operatives. You were just one of many people he compromised. The implications were staggering. If Reeves had been providing information for 2 years, dozens or even hundreds of operations could have been compromised. The damage would take years to fully assess and mitigate. How many others? Sarah asked. We're still working through it, but preliminary analysis suggests at least 40 operatives had their identities and operational details leaked. We're in the process of notifying everyone who was compromised and taking appropriate security measures. After the call ended, Sarah sat in the quiet of her office and processed the information. 40 people whose lives had been put at risk, whose careers might be derailed because one person had chosen betrayal over duty. She thought about Reeves, wondered what had motivated him to make that choice. Money, probably, or perhaps ideology. The specific reasons mattered less than the consequences of his actions. The arrest of Reeves did not eliminate the threats against Sarah, but it did provide some clarity. The enemy's information about her was at least 2 months old now, and they would have difficulty getting updated intelligence now that their source had been cut off. It was a small advantage, but in her line of work, small advantages could make the difference between life and death. As winter gave way to early spring, Sarah's task force began to show concrete results. They had developed 3 new training programs that were being implemented across different units. And they had consulted on 5 major operations, 4 of which had been completed successfully using techniques her team had helped develop. The one failure had been the result of political complications rather than operational shortcomings, and even that mission had achieved partial objectives. General Hawthorne called Sarah to his office on a warm April morning. She entered to find him reviewing reports at his desk, and he gestured for her to sit. I've been reading the assessments of your task force's work, he said, without preamble. The feedback is overwhelmingly positive. Commanders are reporting that the training programs are producing results, and your operational consultations have been valuable. Well done, Colonel. Thank you, sir. The team has worked hard. They have, and so have you. Hawthorne set down the reports and fixed her with his steady gaze. I'm recommending you for a Bronze Star for your actions during Operation Specter 6. The paperwork has been in the works for a while, but we needed to wait until the operation could be declassified. That's happening now, at least in a limited way. There will be a ceremony in 6 weeks. Sarah was momentarily speechless. The Bronze Star was a significant honor, one that carried real weight in military circles. Sir, thank you. I'm honored. You earned it. What you did took courage and skill in equal measure. He paused, then continued, There's something else I want to discuss with you. Your work with the task force has been excellent, but I know it's not the same as field operations. If the security situation changes, if we can find a way to safely put you back in the field, would you want that? It was a question Sarah had been asking herself for months. She had adapted to her new role, found satisfaction in the work, but there was still a part of her that missed the adrenaline and immediacy of operations. Yet she had also discovered something unexpected. She was good at teaching, at helping others develop skills that could save lives. There was value in that, perhaps even more value than in her own individual actions. I don't know, sir, she said honestly. Ask me again in a year. Right now, I think I'm where I need to be. Hawthorne nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. Fair enough. Keep up the good work, Colonel. That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment, feeling a sense of accomplishment she had not experienced in months. The work was different from what she had trained for, but it was meaningful and important. She was making a difference, just in a different way than she had expected. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Drinks with the team tomorrow night to celebrate the task force hitting its 6-month mark. You're required to attend, Colonel. No excuses. Sarah smiled and typed back a confirmation. She had initially kept some distance from her team, maintaining the professional boundaries she thought were appropriate for a commanding officer. But over time, she had learned that effective leadership required connection as well as authority. The people on her team needed to know she valued them not just as assets but as individuals. The celebration the next evening was held at a bar near the base, a casual gathering where rank mattered less than camaraderie. Sarah arrived to find most of her team already there, and they greeted her with genuine warmth. Derek Paulson, the Navy SEAL who had initially questioned her approaches, was the first to hand her a beer. To Colonel Mitchell, he said, raising his glass, who proved that an old dog like me can still learn new tricks. The team laughed and drank, and Sarah felt something she had not experienced in a long time, a sense of belonging that went beyond duty or mission objectives. These people had started as strangers assigned to work together, but they had become something more. They had become a team in the truest sense, united not just by orders but by shared purpose and mutual respect. As the evening wore on and conversations fragmented into smaller groups, Rachel pulled Sarah aside. I wanted to tell you something, Colonel. When I first got this assignment, I wasn't sure what to expect. I'd heard rumors about Specter 6, and I thought you might be one of those operators who's all about the glory and the legend. But you're not. You genuinely care about making the people around you better, about building something that lasts beyond any individual operation. That's rare, and it matters. Thank you, Rachel, Sarah said, touched by the sincerity in her assistant's words. Though I'm not sure I deserve that much credit. I'm just trying to do the job. That's what makes it genuine, Rachel replied. You're not performing leadership. You're actually doing it. The conversation stayed with Sarah as she made her way home later that night. She thought about the path her life had taken. The unexpected turns that had brought her from anonymous field operative to public-facing team leader. It was not the career trajectory she had imagined for herself, but perhaps that was the point. Life rarely followed the plans people made, and the ability to adapt was often more valuable than the ability to execute a perfect strategy. The Bronze Star ceremony took place 6 weeks later, as scheduled. It was a formal affair with full military honors, attended by senior officers and other personnel whose operational records warranted recognition. Sarah stood at attention as General Hawthorne pinned the medal to her uniform and read the citation describing her actions during Operation Specter 6. For exceptionally meritorious achievement in connection with military operations against an armed enemy, he read. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell demonstrated extraordinary courage, technical expertise, and tactical brilliance during a solo infiltration mission in hostile territory. Her actions resulted in the elimination of 3 high-value targets, the prevention of a major terrorist attack, and the collection of intelligence that directly contributed to subsequent successful operations. Her dedication to duty and unwavering commitment to protecting American lives exemplify the highest traditions of military service. As the assembled personnel applauded, Sarah felt the weight of the medal on her chest and understood that it represented more than just her own actions. It represented every person who had trained her, every team member who had supported her operations, every intelligence analyst who had provided the information she needed to succeed. No operation, no matter how solo it appeared, was ever truly the work of one person. After the ceremony, dozens of people congratulated her, shaking her hand and offering their respect. Some were people she knew well, colleagues from her new task force or officers she had worked with over the years. Others were strangers who simply wanted to acknowledge what she had accomplished. Through it all, Sarah maintained the professional grace expected of someone receiving such an honor. But internally, she was already thinking about the work ahead. That night, alone in her apartment with the Bronze Star in its case on her desk, Sarah allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the scared young lieutenant she had been when she first entered special operations training, uncertain whether she had what it took to succeed in such a demanding field. She thought about the first time she had taken a life in combat, the weight of that decision and the way it had changed her. She thought about the 3 men who had died during Specter 6, the lives they might have taken if she had not stopped them, and the people who now wanted revenge for their deaths. The path of violence and counter-violence seemed endless sometimes, an eternal cycle that consumed people and nations alike. But Sarah had learned that dwelling on the philosophical impossibilities of her profession was a path to paralysis. She could only control her own actions, could only make the decisions that seemed right in the moment with the information available. The rest was beyond her power to influence. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "We saw the ceremony on the military channel. Your father and I are so proud of you, sweetheart. We always knew you were destined for great things." Sarah smiled and typed back a simple thank you, wishing she could tell them the full story of what she had done and what it had cost her. But some secrets had to remain secrets. Some burdens had to be carried alone. It was part of the price of the life she had chosen. The following months brought new challenges and new opportunities. Sarah's task force expanded, taking on additional personnel and a broader mandate. They began working with allied forces from other nations, sharing techniques and learning from different operational approaches. Sarah found herself traveling frequently, giving briefings and consultations to military units around the world. The threats against her gradually diminished as time passed, and other targets became more relevant to her enemies. She never completely let her guard down, maintaining the security protocols that had become second nature, but the acute sense of danger faded into a background awareness that she could manage without constant vigilance. 1 year after the Pentagon briefing that had changed everything, Sarah stood in front of a new class of officers attending an advanced training course her task force had developed. She looked at their faces, saw the mixture of eagerness and uncertainty that she remembered from her own early training, and felt a sense of purpose that was different from, but no less powerful than what she had felt during her field operations. "The techniques you're going to learn over the next 8 weeks are unconventional," she told them. "Some of you are going to question why we're teaching you things that don't fit traditional special operations doctrine. That's good. Questioning is how we improve and adapt. But I want you to understand something fundamental. The goal of special operations isn't to be the toughest or the most aggressive. The goal is to achieve mission objectives with minimum risk and maximum effectiveness. Sometimes that means kicking down doors and overwhelming opposition with superior force. But sometimes it means being invisible, being patient, being willing to spend weeks or months setting up a single perfect moment." She could see some of them nodding, beginning to understand. Others looked skeptical, which was fine. Skepticism would fade as they experienced the practical applications of what she was teaching. Over the course of this training, you're going to learn skills that might seem peripheral to combat operations, Sarah continued. Language and cultural immersion, acting and improvisation, social engineering, patience and observation. These skills might not seem as exciting as tactical shooting or hand-to-hand combat, but I promise you they can be just as deadly and far more effective in the right circumstances. After the class, as students filed out discussing what they had heard, Sarah gathered her notes and reflected on how far she had come. She was no longer Specter 6, the lone operative working in the shadows. She was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, team leader and instructor, someone whose influence extended far beyond her own individual actions. It was different from what she had imagined for herself, but it was good work, important work, and in the end, that was what mattered most.